We are officially recording. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. We still have a few people coming in, but we are going to get started. We are very, very glad that we have so many people joining us from all over the world. We're so glad you're here with us today. For those who don't know me, my name is Caitlin Kennedy. I am the co-chair of the Germany Progressive Caucus. I'm seated here next to my co-chair, Antar Keith. Antar is one of our presenters today, so that's why I am moderating solo. And as we said, for those who might have just joined us, we are recording right now during our speaker presentations, but when we get to the audience participatory phase, we will stop the recording. So before we truly get started, I just wanted to give everyone a brief intro to the Germany Progressive Caucus. For those who may be new to us, we are the Germany branch of the Global Progressive Caucus. And here at the Germany Progressive Caucus, we're very dedicated to building a space for education and action on political issues from a progressive perspective, focusing on our shared values of transparency, accountability, and equality, while also recognizing the American people's diversity of experience. And we have a special motto that guides all of our activities and efforts. That's educate, agitate, organize. And for us, education always translates into action. And that is why we're here today. So if you aren't already a member of the Progressive Caucus and this sounds like something that might appeal to you, then we invite you to head on over to www.democratsabroad.org/PC and sign up to become a member. Rita, would you mind putting that link for me in the chat? Right, so now we are getting started. During our meeting today, we ask that everyone please keep their mics on mute during the presentations or when you're not speaking. But please don't worry, we will have time for audience Q&A. We also ask throughout the duration of the meeting that people please remain polite and respectful. We hope that we can maintain respectful discourse, even if we might have some differing opinions. If we can't do that, if we can't keep away from personal insults or anything like that, we might have to mute someone. But we really don't think things will come to that point. We think we can all treat each other kindly and respectfully. So that should hopefully not be necessary. So now to the moment everyone's been waiting for. We're very happy to welcome an excellent lineup of speakers today here to talk to us about Democrats Abroad resolutions number 19 and 20. And the resolution links are being sent in the chat if you haven't had a chance to take a look at them. But before we do get started, we do want to give a little bit of background on those resolutions. So the first resolution, number 19, simply affirms Democrats Abroad's support for HR 2590, prohibiting the use of US military foreign aid for the detention of children. This House resolution was introduced earlier this year by US Rep. Betty McCollum and has support from a long list of progressive organizations and 28 co-sponsors in Congress, including Jamal Bowman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush, and more. Resolution 20 is a bit more broad. In addition to supporting HR 2590, it asks for DA to advocate for American tax dollar funded military aid to the state of Israel to be conditioned on Israeli compliance with international law, UN resolutions, and respect for human rights. So now I would like to turn things over to our three resolution authors, Rita Sabuni, immediate past chair of Democrats Abroad UAE, his successor, Sam Kunaisi, the current chair of DA UAE, and Rabbi David Mibasir, who formerly lived in Israel but is now a DPCA voting representative in Canada. And the authors will have 10 minutes to speak. I'm going to have to be pretty strict with the time limits today, so we make sure we have adequate time for Q&A. So for all the speakers, when we get to the 1 minute mark, I'm going to hold up my yellow sign and my red sign when we get to the 10-minute mark. So if you aren't noticing me, I will unmute and let you know when time is up. So for the next 10 minutes, the authors would like to share with you why they penned these resolutions and why they think we should all support them. So Rita, Sam, and David, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, and thank you to the Germany Progressive Caucus for organizing this event and to everyone for being here. So as Caitlin mentioned, my name is Rita Sabuni, and I am a DA member and co-author of both of these resolutions. From 2019 to earlier this year, I was chair of the DA Country Committee in the UAE. So I'm really glad to be with you all today, because if you are progressive, you should be supporting this issue, period. Why should our taxpayer dollars be used to fund human rights abuses in Israel when we could divert those funds to progressive causes like Medicare for All, Green New Deal, and other progressive priorities? While these resolutions are focused on enforcing US laws and taxpayer funds, they do certainly have foreign policy implications. And of course, for many years, this was a bit of a taboo topic. But I'm very happy that today that is simply no longer the case. The tide is turning on this issue within the Democratic Party and among progressives as a whole. And so today, we should not be afraid to fully support all of our progressive causes, including this one. Now, supporting these resolutions on their merits should be fairly obvious. You all can read the resolutions. It's really pretty simple. It's a fact that Palestinians living under Israeli occupation for over 50 years are subjected to human rights abuses by the state of Israel. We're talking torture of children, extrajudicial killings, and demolition of Palestinian homes. This is well documented by human rights organizations and our own State Department. Now, it's also a fact that there is a law, Leahy laws, that specifically prohibits US funding of such human rights abuses. And it's a fact that US taxpayer dollars are used to fund the purchase of military hardware that is used to carry out these human rights violations. Last time we checked, 1 + 1 should equal 2. So we are advocating for application of an existing law, which means conditioning US military aid to the state of Israel. Again, it's very simple. To complement our important Get Out the Vote operation, Democrats Abroad has a long history of advocating for progressive causes just like this one. And we have also passed over 16 resolutions since 2001 on issues with foreign policy implications, such as opposing the Iraq War, and yes, even supporting Israeli-Palestinian peace. So this issue is a long-standing one, and the reason why we single out Israel is because they are the largest recipient of US foreign military aid, with $38 billion of US taxpayer funds to be delivered over the next decade, and more than $146 billion delivered since 1948. It's also the one country we provide with more diplomatic protection than any other, shielding it from UN resolutions seeking to hold it accountable for the regular violations of international law and human rights. So like it or not, Israeli human rights abuses occur in our name. So that's why we wrote these resolutions, and I hope to have your support in passing them at our global DPCA vote next month. I look forward to the discussion today, and will next pass the mic on to my fellow co-author, Rabbi David Vasser.
Good. Thank you very much, Rita. You gave really good background about the issue itself. Just to introduce myself, I've been involved with this issue for more than 50 years. And I've lived in Israel for 4 years. I have adult children who have lived there for more years than I have. My adult daughter is there now. And I'm personally very engaged with this issue. I want to focus on like the political rationale for why have resolutions about this in Democrats Abroad. So the Democrats Abroad is the place in the Democratic Party where I participate in the Democratic Party. It's like my niche, it's my entry point. I vote in Pennsylvania, but the Pennsylvania Democratic Party is not where I connect, it's Democrats Abroad. And within the Democratic Party, there's a push and a pull. There's kind of a struggle over this issue of how the US supports Israel with its needs and how the US impacts the Palestinian people. Of us, Democratic voters, are understanding that the US position really needs to shift. And the way to express this is through this kind of political action. To have resolutions like this within our section of the Democratic Party, to help support members of Congress who are already there with us. And I think most importantly, to signal from us to members of Congress who are conscientious, who are thinking about this, and who are subjected to tremendous pressure to stay away from a position like this, and also to signal to members of the administration, and also to signal to the leadership of the Democratic Party itself, that the grassroots of the Democratic Party wants American tax dollars to be used for valid purposes and not to violate human rights of other people. So the reason why I'm authored this and submitted it, and I'm still working to get it adopted by Democrats abroad, is mostly to signal that to our political leaders in the federal government. I want to point out that the resolutions align clearly with the majority of Democratic voters. In 2016 and in 2020, roughly 65% of us voted for Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders in the Senate has supported this position. And I want to add that this is not a thing that splits Jewish voters from others. If you go to Representative McCollum's website and you look at her, the web page about HR 2590, you'll see that very large, influential Jewish American Zionist organizations have formally endorsed this resolution. This is what they think is best. And I'm talking about a group called J Street, which is huge and has great influence. A smaller group called Americans for Peace Now. A group that I'm a member of called Teruah, which is made up of over 2,000 rabbis and cantors and synagogues across America. My own rabbinic association, which has over 300 rabbis in it. So my point here is that this is not something that in any way can be construed as being anti-Jewish. It's not anti-Israel. People in Israel support this. There are people in Israel who know that this can help them be free of the kinds of things that they're caught up in, and are urging us as Americans to devote our American tax dollars to ways that are going to help everyone there live better. So I think I'll leave it at that. It's just a bit about the political rationale for these two resolutions, and I'll pass it to Sam.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, David. It is great to be here. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Sam Kunaisi. I'm the chair of Democrats Abroad UAE. And I want to thank each single person who attended this event so far. So let me just go briefly about the reason why we introduced those resolutions. As Rabbi David said, this is a resolution that we are advocating for peace, totally peace. And this is something that also could serve Israel. We're not singling out Israel towards anything. We know Israel now, for the past 20 years, has been maybe more controlled by right-wing parties. And us introducing those kind of resolutions and making the US conditioning American aid to Israel based on that only will give more strength to the left-wing parties in Israel. And that's the direction we want to head forward, to have peace. We have a right-wing prime minister right now who does not even believe in a two-state solution. So what's going to happen to the peace plan? And this is something supported for the past 7 decades by the United States. So the United States, in our opinion, could play a big role in making this peace possible. But by giving this kind of aid again and again, we are encouraging bad behavior by the Israeli government. And bad behavior means no peace at all. Let's look at the brief example that we saw in the May war in 2021, since this is the most recent one, and how it started. It started by Israeli military going to Sheikh Jarrah, a neighborhood who lived Palestinians for many, many decades, and going and kicking families, moms, dads. It's Can you imagine you being part of that situation and being kicked out from your family? Put your shoes in their shoes. Put your place in their place. Then you're gonna have a clear response. We need to be part of we are the minority right now, and this is a historic resolution, and I have full confidence we're gonna gain more momentum. So let's start. All movements start small and get bigger. Let's be the good minority and support those resolutions and sign this kind of petition. It's a brave step. What we're doing now and you being part of this meeting, it's a brave step already. So let's join together. Let's make this kind of thing work. I don't want to speak so much about the merit of those resolutions because I think you know them all. It's very clear. And this example of Sheikh Jarrah, it's only one example of 100 examples that happen. So this is not unique. The unique part about it is Hamas responded. If we want to discredit organizations like Hamas, that's why we should support this deal. Because for a Palestinian living there.
Time is up, Sam. I hate to cut you off.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
I really hate it. I really don't enjoy it.
Thank you, Caitlin. I apologize. I was not looking at your screen.
Thank
you. I want to give it to Rabbi Jeremy, and thank you so much for making this happen. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you so much, Rita, David, and Sam for your comments. I just want to pop a few links in the chat right now. There's more information available. The authors have created a great frequently asked questions document that I'm going to pass along now. We're also going to come back to this again at the end, but just in case anyone has to leave early, we want to make sure you get that now. Sam also briefly alluded to a petition that anyone who already supports these resolutions can sign and share. I'm going to link that as well in the chat right now, but we will come back to this and talk about this more at the end. But just in case anyone has to leave early, there is a petition that any DA member who supports these resolutions can sign. So again, thank you to our resolution authors. Our next speaker is, as Sam mentioned, Rabbi Jeremy Milgrom, and Rabbi David is going to give a very brief introduction of our next speaker.
Well, briefly, I met Jeremy maybe 30 or 40 years ago when I was living in Israel. Jeremy's been there for 53 years. And he's one of the founders of a very important organization in Israel called Rabbis for Human Rights. And he's devoted himself literally for decades to bringing human rights to everyone who lives there. And I think it's really important to hear from him as an American Jew, also a member of Democrats Abroad, who's been living on the ground there for more than half a century. So thank you for joining us, Jeremy.
Thank you, David. Thanks, everybody. It's exciting to be in this broadcast and to see a lot of young faces. Some of us are graying, some of you not yet. My first action as a young Democrat was wearing a button saying, if I were 21, I would vote for Kennedy. That was in 1960. And that's before they changed the law that made it possible to vote when you're 18, which was lucky that it passed because in 1972, I was 19 and I voted for McGovern, and all of my Israeli friends thought I was crazy. And then a year and a half later, Watergate came around and people said, oh, how did you know? I said, come on. We knew Nixon was a crook. Now, jumping ahead 20 years to the election that got Rabin elected, and that was the beginning of the Oslo process, I had a collection of T-shirts that were, radical T-shirts from the activism that I was doing. And I was careful where to wear them, where not to wear them. And one day I forgot that I should be careful, but it was the day after they announced that there were talks between Israel and the PLO, and they were going to sign the Oslo Accords on the White House lawn. And I went into a grocery store in a very right-wing neighborhood, and the guy looked at me and he says, okay, you guys won, we'll be okay. And I'm mentioning this because there will be a feeling of discomfort in Israel when the American administration finally puts its foot down and says to Israel, you know, the unconditional support, the blank check that we're giving you all the time, those days are over. And I think this will happen. I hope it will happen. It was terrible under Trump. It wasn't much better before that, but it got worse with Trump. And I think Biden needs a lot of encouragement to move more forcefully for a just peace. And there'll be Israelis who will be kicking and screaming all the way. But I think that that's not a reason not to do it. And I heard someone saying, well, you know, if Democrats abroad supports this resolution, then Democrats abroad in Israel will be picked on and will be in trouble and harassed and that kind of thing. And I want to say categorically that it's not going to happen that way. There's a little brouhaha going on right now, if you're following the news, about Ben and Jerry's, that the Israeli franchise is adamant about selling Ben and Jerry's to the settlers in the West Bank, illegal settlements, and there's this protest about this move to change the franchise owner, and so a lot of Israelis are upset about this. But I think a lot of Israelis are also waking up and saying, okay, you know, first of all, it's just ice cream. Let's not get carried away. And actually, there is such a thing as a green line, and let's see if we can find some way to move forward. I think I see these resolutions as a way forward, and the idea that oh, we have to be careful and think about how some Israelis are entrenched in this idea that, oh no, you can't criticize, you can't tell us what to do. I think those days are over, and I think with some real conversation, and I think these resolutions will engender a conversation, I think that will make a big difference. So I'm not going to go on. I think the point is clear. We're ready for it. The time has come, and I'll stay on the conversation, and we'll see what comes up. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your thoughts on these resolutions. I just want to remind everyone who has joined us a little bit later that you will have time to ask your questions of all of our speakers. We do have dedicated Q&A at the end of the call. So please keep listening, keep your ideas ready, and all of our speakers are very happy to enter into dialogue with you when we get there. And next, we are turning to our next speaker, Kifa Abu-Kandir. She's a Palestinian-American DA Israel member, and she would like to share with us why these resolutions are so important to her. Kifa, you have 10 minutes, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, everyone. I have been living inside of Palestine, Israel, for over 20 years. And one of the things I've always had to deal with is the aid that comes to Israel, the unconditional aid, and what it has done to my life. First of all, the unconditional aid has facilitated the occupation. It has facilitated all the facets of the occupation, being demolished homes, exiling, and let me put it this way: in the past 20 years, nothing has gotten better. The militarization has increased. And I've always wondered, why is it that it's my tax dollars that is funding the unconditional militarization of my society and my community. My community is also diminishing and is in a constant battle to stay in survival mode. My dream is that our aid would be used to build communities where we say we the people, and people are judged by the content of their character. My aid and my tax dollars are being used to destroy people. I have lived there. I've had 2 homes demolished. I have lived there. I've been beaten by IDF. In regards to these specific to the conditioning of look, I know that we're not Congress here, okay? But we have to keep opening up doors and we have to keep opening up new avenues for conversations. Conditioning military aid isn't punishing Israel. It's setting Israel on a new track. And it's opening up places for people like me who see Israelis as their equal so that I can engage with them in a safe place. I have been trying to open up, with the help of DA Israel members, a Palestinian chapter. And Palestinians, honestly, even Americans married to Palestinians do not feel safe voting because it puts them on a radar and it puts them on some type of tracking. I would really like, I feel like if these two resolutions were passed, that some type of safe space and confidence would be built. In regards to prohibiting US military foreign aid for the detention of children, I'm going to bring up the personal story of my cousin who was an American citizen and he was beaten by IDF and arrested. When my cousin was kidnapped and murdered, and this goes back to basically right now, the situation that we have there is basically nationalism has become a cult for both communities. And we have people who have taken it upon themselves to react and to militarize themselves. My cousin was kidnapped and murdered brutally. And for 1 month, we were basically held hostage by the Israeli military. We could not leave, we could not go out. We were constantly bombarded and we were harassed for my cousin being murdered and kidnapped. It was probably, I cannot describe, it was 1 month of pure hell. And this was all funded by my tax dollars. Now, the last person to see him alive is Tariq, and you can look him up. His name is Tariq Abu Kadir. He lives in Tampa, and he's an American citizen. And he was taken in by the IDF. He was not taken in by police. He had the living hell beat out of him. He had to go to hospital. He was incarcerated. We had to call the American consulate and to get them involved to get him out. He was lucky. He has American citizenship. He was able to leave the incarceration. Other kids did not. Tariq had committed the crime of wanting to go out under curfew to go visit Muhammad's mother, because Tariq was the last person to see him alive. And he was taken behind a building, and this was caught on video. And literally, he was taken up like a rag doll by the 3 IDF soldiers and thrown. And he was thrown into a Jeep and incarcerated. So these are my tax dollars and they were used on American citizens. And this is another reason why we should condition how aid is given to, because there is no discrimination. Tariq was not asked if he was an American citizen or if he had Jerusalem residency, or if he had Israeli citizenship. I have Israeli citizenship. It has not protected me from anything. It has not protected my children. They also have Israeli citizenship. So again, I'm advocating and asking you to please vote in favor of these 2 resolutions so that we can start building safe spaces and opening doors for new conversations. And this all comes in, and this is all facilitated by our money. It's time that we start building new conversations of equality and equity in each other and in each other's future. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Kifa, for sharing your stories with us. I'm sure that was not easy for you, but thank you very much. Next up, we have Antar Keith. He is the co-chair of the Germany Progressive Caucus. He's also sitting right next to me. And he is also the new chair of the Democrats Abroad Global Reparations Task Force, which was created after a resolution that Antar passed wrote, and then it was passed in the most recent DPCA meeting. So Antar, you have 5 minutes, and they are beginning now.
Fair enough. Thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. And thank you everybody else who has spoken already. Before the global elections, many DA members, including many DPCA representatives, showed and demonstrated support for my resolution in support of the reparations study bill. I want to thank you again for that support, and I would hope the same goodwill could now be extended to another problem that hurts the Black community in America. When we declare BLM, or support for reparations for Black Americans, we are in essence striving to eliminate the threats against us. The reparations resolution was real action. If we do not put action behind words, we merely risk perpetuating the Sisyphean cycle of protesting while doing nothing real to stop problems. Like the proverbial Antaeus, we must uproot the threat of structural discrimination wherever we discover it, because it is not limited to clean geopolitical borders, but still remains a domestic threat. Allow me to explain. Not only does the Israeli military engage in human rights abuses and what Amnesty International lists as war crimes, many reports suggest that exposure to such tactics by our US police do not make them less prone to unnecessary death, but rather the opposite. To date, many US civilian police forces implicated in high-profile and routine abuses and violent misconduct in the US have trained with the Israeli military. US police training with the Israeli military, a military we fund, should concern all DA members who support BLM. The reason this should concern us is that the training of soldiers, unlike police, is not to arrest fellow citizens, but rather to neutralize threats, both real and perceived, and often with extreme prejudice. To date, according to Amnesty International, Baltimore law enforcement officials, along with hundreds of other officers and officials from departments across Florida, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California, Arizona, Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Georgia, Washington State, as well as the DC Capitol Police, have all trained to Israel for military-style police training, while thousands of others have received training from Israeli officials within the United States. A 2018 report from Jewish Voice for Peace and the American-Israeli Alliance states, from the acting deputy director of ICE to the current chief of police in Washington, D.C., from San Diego to Chicago to Atlanta, since 2002, thousands of American law enforcement officials have trained in Israel with the Israeli police, military, and the Shin Bet. But despite their branding as top-tier counterterrorism experts, these Israeli forces regularly violate civil rights and implement racist and deadly policies. For instance, doing a Google image search for BLM Palestine brings up a variety of photos depicting eerily similar and overly aggressive submission tactics employed by the IDF against Palestinian citizens in the occupied territories. Many of these tactics bear similarity between the one deployed against George Floyd in Minneapolis. For instance, in the West Bank, one unarmed 68-year-old Palestinian named Khari Hanoun, who was filmed being subjected to this treatment back in September with a knee behind his head, his neck, what declared after surviving, Israeli forces wanted to kill me in the Floyd case. Now, it is not my intention to suppose that this technique was trained specifically by the IDF, but it is clear that this technique is used in situations where there is a palpable sense of domination over subdued and disenfranchised people by a well-armed and well-funded superior force. If George Floyd's death is indicative of police force abuses, then we should be wary about supplying funding for other forces to not only participate in these tactics, but train our police to bring the occupation home. We can stop this cycle, and we can stop it in our own way. To declare Black Lives Matter and only care about Black life within the context of America misses the threat towards Black life throughout the world and how external forces also influence the plight of Black Americans. If you truly believe Black Lives Matter, then let's start by getting our government back on the right track and on the right side of US domestic policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antar, for sharing with us. And now we are going to turn to our final speaker, who is also our keynote speaker for the day, Akram Baker. For those who do not know, Akram is a longtime political analyst and management consultant. He's worked with numerous corporations, governments, and NGOs throughout the world, including Daimler, Ban AG, the World Bank, and the GZ, in addition to his senior advisory roles to the governors of the Central Bank of Egypt and the Palestinian Monetary Authority. In the 1990s, Akram was spokesman to Faisal Husseini, head of the Palestinian negotiating team. A fourth-generation American of Palestinian descent, he was an active supporter of the Obama 2008 and 2012 campaigns and of Joe Biden in 2020. His rants and opinions, he says, can be found on Deutsche Welle, the BBC, and many, many other newspapers, magazines, and media outlets. He currently resides in Berlin. He's a DA Germany member. He's lived extensively in the United States, Palestine, Egypt, and Germany. Akram, thank you so much for joining us today, and your 10 minutes start now.
Thanks a lot, Caitlin. And I must admit, I'm having a little bit of blast from the past because I met you, Jeremy, 30 years ago. I mean, I was a young buck with hair at an Orient House, but I know that we've met on a number of occasions. And I just realized that I met Kifah too in the 1990s because I know your relatives very well in Sharafat, right? There you go. Bushra and Tammin and all of them are very good friends. And I remember, okay, anyway. So it's almost like a reunion here of some sorts for me. Anyway, good evening to everybody, and thanks a whole lot, Caitlin, everybody, for everything that they've done to bring this meeting forward and these resolutions. I'm going to be a little more sober in what I want to talk about here, because I think there are only two questions which we need to ask: is do we want to score points or do we want to win? And if we want to win, can we win this? If you'd have asked me this 10 or 15 years ago, I would have said absolutely without hesitation, yes, let's just score points because there's no way we can win. I mean, just the mention of restricting aid to Israel or even being mildly pro-Palestinian meant electoral suicide in the United States. But as we all know, the Democratic Party has changed since then. And we progressives are growing stronger with every election cycle. I mean, this is a clear and obvious point which we all need to recognize. A substantial portion, if not an outright majority, of the rank and file of the Democratic Party are no longer blindly indebted or intimidated by the right-wing Israeli lobby. And a lot of you people here are living proof that the concept of a Democratic candidate can resist Israeli interference in the American legislative process and still win an election. And I'm really glad to have this chance to talk to you about this. It might be a little bit controversial, but we'll see. I personally believe we can win this. We should win this, and we should also win the votes in the House. And I think this is my way of how we should do it, how we should achieve this goal. This is simply my humble opinion. One, any resolution, any bill, anything we put forward needs to be made yesable. And I mean by yesable is that we take away the reasons for them to say no. We need to directly aim our efforts at the delegates who are either less informed or sitting on the fence. We don't need to preach to the choir. I don't need to convince Antar or Kifah of what Israel does to the Palestinians, or Jeremy, or that they're wasting our money and using it we know that. We also don't need to waste our time and breath on right-wing Zionist members who are not going to agree with us no matter what we say. You can't mildly criticize Israel and they're just going to reject it. But we need to look at our colleagues who are hesitant, and they should not be ignored, nor should their concerns or their worries. We need to take these into account. And what we need to do is to take removing the main reasons for them to say no. We need it to make it easier for these colleagues of ours to say yes. For example, the names of the resolutions, I think, are completely unimportant. It's the result that counts. If Congress were to come tomorrow and say that they would support an independent Palestinian state, but they want to call it Israelistan, I'd go for it. I don't care. What matters is the result. And the result is to condition aid to Israel. Look, we all know the line of attack which is going to come under, or in any kind of resolution or a bill in Congress that's going to come forward later about this. We know how it's going to be attacked. So let's disarm them in advance. Round one, they're going to say Congress has no agency to make foreign policy decisions, and this is exactly what it is. Our answer, it's not true. This is a budgetary issue. Regulating the disbursement of discretionary funds approved by Congress. The law of the United States, and this reason is the Leahy Amendments from 1997, which forbid the US State Department and Department of Defense from providing military assistance to foreign security forces that violates human rights with impunity. This is very much the job of Congress to ensure its laws are upheld by the executive branch. It's that simple. Two, they're going to say, oh, I can't support this resolution because it singles out Israel. Either it singles out Israel or only democratic ally or only ally in the Middle East, or just it singles out Israel and that's not fair. And my answer to that would be the resolution should state that the Leahy amendments are to be respected regardless of the end beneficiary. Whether this is Egypt, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, the Palestinian Authority, Jordan, Israel, Brazil, hell, even Canada. The law is the law. We should, in my opinion, we shouldn't even mention Israel in it. I know this is going to be controversial, but I said in the end, it's the result that matters. I care that our tax dollars are conditionally restricted to all of them. And to be honest with you, I'm happy when they restrict it to Egypt and to Saudi Arabia and Canada. Also, I mean, why should we, I really ask this question, why should we say just Israel? Do you really think they are bigger human rights offenders than General Sisi in Egypt? They're not. They're actually, Sisi, I believe, is worse. So it should all be restricted to everybody. Some people will say, don't push this now. It's only going to help the GOP in the midterms. You know, all you're doing is trying to make the Democratic Party look like a bunch of left-wing radicals. That's patently false. The American accountability for American laws is not even controversial with a majority of Americans. The Republican Party, we know, it completely sold its soul and its vote to the fringe right wing. Trump, Netanyahu, McCarthy, McConnell and company, they have no interest in bipartisanship, no matter what we do. No matter what we say, they don't care. So we should not waste our time on these people. This unholy alliance has consistently and repeatedly done everything in power to undermine and demean everything any Democrat has done. So just to stake out, we need to stake out how different we are from them. And it is an absolute net positive on any scoreboard. So I'm agreeing with my colleagues here to say, we need to be bold in what we talk about. The American people are looking for that. Our Democrats are looking for that. We're not looking for waffles here. We're looking to be bold in what do we stand for? You know, what's the reason? I mean, I'm a longtime activist. You know, I've been 10 times imprisoned in Israeli jails and I was deported. You know, I'm not allowed to go back anymore as an American. And it's so heartening to see how many Democrats have adopted a pro-American position, because I believe this is a pro-American, not even a pro-Palestinian position. This is pro-American. Why should we be kowtowing to a foreign entity? It disgusts me. It disgusted me to see how Obama was kicked around by Netanyahu and he just took it. That insulted me as an American. How could we let our president be bullied by a foreign entity? None of us want that. Now, it's especially encouraging to witness the plethora of American Jews who have upheld the sacred Jewish traditions and rejecting their elders' mantra, of checking their liberalism at the door when it comes to Israel. And the latest Jewish Electoral Institute poll from July, from this month, shows that a full 25% of American Jews believe that Israel is an apartheid state. 25% of American Jewish voters. And that figure goes up to 38% when talking to American Jewish voters 40 and younger. I mean, that's amazing. 40 years ago, those numbers would have been, I mean, I could ask Jeremy or David more about that, but they were probably one of the only 2 or to 200 who actually thought like that or were able to talk about it openly. We need to show that Palestine lives matter too. We should connect it to the Black Lives Matter movement. But our job here and now is to get these resolutions passed. It's to win, because now we have the chance to affect change at a practical level. And it's because of all the work that all of you guys have done for these past 30, 40 years. I mean, it's amazing. We all want the same thing here. You know, all we want is that Israel and other despotic regimes adhere to the American law before they get our American dollars. It's about our sovereignty as a nation, to finally reject the tail wagging the dog. American accountability for American laws. It's something that all of us can proudly stand for. That's my 2 cents. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Akram, for being here with us today. Thank you to all of our speakers. I am so impressed that we are actually 5 minutes ahead of schedule, guys, which means we have 5 extra minutes for Q&A. So as I said earlier, we are going to stop recording right now so we can head into the Q&A. So let me just give me a moment while I stop the recording.